All right, let's dive right into the absolute chaos of vague AI mandates, and more importantly, how we can systematically bring them to order. Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you've ever been in a room where leadership just kind of demands an AI strategy, and usually there are tens of millions of dollars attached to it, you know exactly the kind of panic that sets in. People scramble, budgets get totally hijacked, and honestly, the actual customer is completely forgotten in the mix. So how do we stop burning cash and start building things that actually matter? Well, today we're going to unpack a framework that cuts right through all of that noise.
You know, it almost always starts with a really well-intentioned but incredibly vague executive brief. Picture a Fortune 500 grocery chain. You've got the senior vice president sitting in a board meeting. They lean into the microphone and they just declare, "We want AI for our customers." Right? The board nods enthusiastically. This massive funding pool is suddenly unlocked. And the SVP divides the work up among 4 different directors. And watch what happens next. Everyone just sprints off in completely separate directions, desperate to be the very first one to innovate. They start hiring consultants, spinning up these specialized strike teams, and buying up technology without ever actually talking to one another. Fast forward about 6 months, and the results of that fragmented approach start rolling in. And it is a total mess. You've got this shiny new website chatbot built by the digital team, and at the exact same time, a returns processing language model built by the contact center team. And because there was absolutely no unified architecture of the problem space from day one, both of these AI tools are literally trying to answer the exact same customer question, where is my order? But they're pulling from different databases and giving completely different answers. You wind up with disconnected vendor contracts, heavily duplicated budgets, and overlapping scopes that do nothing but frustrate the exact customer you were trying to help in the first place. Okay, let's move into section 1, the MECE Framework, bringing order to the chaos. Now, a forward-deployed engineer actually solved this entire organizational nightmare with a single sheet of paper and a very specific mental model. They didn't write some 50-page strategy doc. They didn't bring in yet another overpriced vendor. They just drew a tree. They used a framework coined by Barbara Minto over at McKinsey called MECE. It stands for Mutually Exclusive and Collectively Exhaustive. Let's break that down, because honestly, it is the ultimate reasoning discipline for turning a vague mandate into a highly defensible strategy. Mutually exclusive means there are absolutely zero overlaps. Every single problem or use case in your entire universe fits into one branch of your strategy and only one. Collectively exhaustive just means there are zero gaps. When you combine all the branches together, they cover the absolute entirety of your problem space, the whole shebang. Now, when you don't have this reasoning discipline, your decomposition is going to fail in 2 very distinct ways. Teams are either going to claim the exact same scope, or they're going to treat crucial missing pieces as one-offs. Overlap essentially shows up as double-counted work. This is that painful moment when you realize you're paying 2 different AI vendors hundreds of thousands of dollars to solve the exact same problem for 2 different departments. A gap, on the other hand, shows up when a genuinely critical use case keeps popping up in cross-functional meetings. But because it doesn't cleanly fit anywhere in your poorly defined strategy, it just gets ignored or passed around like a hot potato until it suddenly turns into a massive crisis. So when you finally sit down to draw out your strategy tree, 12 is your absolute anchor. Your tree should have exactly 3 levels and a maximum of 12 leaves at the very bottom. If you start straying from this, actually, scratch that. If you stray from this, you are no longer building a thinking tool. You're just building a corporate org chart. If you find yourself wanting to add a 4th or 5th level of complexity, your initial categories were simply too generic to begin with. 3 levels, 12 actionable leaves. That is exactly where strategic clarity lives, and it forces you to prioritize ruthlessly. Which brings us nicely to section 2, the 4 MECE tests, checking your work. Once you draw your tree, you have to pressure test it against these 4 rules, and these are completely non-negotiable. Test 1, the overlap test. Make sure you aren't double counting anything. Test 2, the coverage test. Ensures you aren't totally missing hidden customer problems. Test 3 secures the borders. That's the boundary-narration test. And this one is absolutely vital. It should take you exactly 90 seconds or less, spoken out loud, to prove if your boundaries are solid. Why 90 seconds? Well, if you have to spend 5 minutes explaining the difference between 2 branches, your boundary is fuzzy. And if it's fuzzy on a whiteboard, it's going to be a total disaster in production. If you can't state the exact boundary in a single crisp sentence, the tree fails. Let's really look at test number 4, because this is where pretty much every tech team trips up. It's organizing by the technology rather than the actual customer experience. Literally, the single most common AI strategy error. If your branches are named things like large language models or recommendation engine or computer vision, you fail immediately.
Think about it. The exact same tool can serve multiple outcomes, and a single outcome can be solved by a bunch of different tools. By centering the tool, you completely lose sight of the goal. You must always decompose by outcome. A passing branch looks something like reduced checkout abandonment. That is an outcome you can actually measure, regardless of whatever flashy AI tool you eventually decide to plug into it.
Moving on to Section 3, Working the Problem, Decomposing AI for Our Customers. Let's apply this framework directly back to our grocery chain. Remember, they have a $40 million budget, an 18-month timeline, and a hopelessly vague mandate to build AI for our customers. So how do we split it up? Well, splitting that work by channel fails the overlap test instantly. If you try to organize by web, app, and in-store, just think about the checkout process. Checkout happens in all three of those channels. You've instantly created massive overlap. But if you split by the customer's actual journey, pre-purchase, in-store or in-app intent, and post-purchase, every single customer interaction maps perfectly and cleanly to one specific stage of intent. It creates these really beautiful narratable boundaries. And just look at how this three-level structure perfectly cascades down to map our 12 actionable leaves. It immediately reveals which of our existing chaotic pilots we actually need to keep, which ones we need to split apart, and which ones we just need to kill entirely. Level 1 is the journey itself. Level 2 breaks those broad journey stages down into specific customer outcomes, like discovery or returns. And then finally, Level 3 gives us our exact use cases. Those are the leaves of our tree. Suddenly, that messy web chatbot from the very beginning of this explainer, we can see exactly where it belongs under this framework. And honestly, much more importantly, we know exactly where it doesn't belong. Now, going through the process of building this tree is going to force some incredibly hard conversations, like deciding that setting a price is firmly a discovery outcome, while checkout's only job is to convert that price. This is what we call a contested boundary. You might naturally think, well, the price physically changes when I am looking at my cart, so it clearly belongs to the checkout team, right? But think about the outcome. The AI's decision is actually about what price to surface to the customer in their moment of awareness to drive them to buy. Forcing price personalization into the discovery branch aligns the right metrics like click-through rates and early conversion indicators to the right specialized team. Here is another incredibly common contested boundary, the classic "where is my refund" question. By placing it firmly under returns rather than generic customer service, we use the exact same triage team and the exact same metrics, completely avoiding that overlap trap. If you just dump refund questions under general service, your service team is going to end up duplicating the exact same systems, taxonomy, and database queries that your returns team is already using every single day. Using the MECE framework here literally prevents an expensive, multi-million-dollar mistake before a single line of code is ever even written. All right, Section 4, Avoiding Common Tree Pitfalls and Keeping Your Strategy Defensible. You know, it is incredibly easy to create categories that look highly organized on a whiteboard, but they completely fall apart the second you apply them to reality. You've got to be aware of categories that look clean but are actually fuzzy. Again, if you can't define the boundary in one sentence, you are going to create overlap downstream. For example, dividing users into existing versus lapsed customers is false MECE. It sounds great, but what does it actually mean? Is a customer who bought something 18 months ago lapsed, or are they just an existing customer who hasn't been back in a while? You fix this fatal flaw by defining the actual mathematical threshold. Relabeling it "no purchase in 12 months" creates a rock-solid, defensible boundary that literally any engineer or product manager can instantly understand. Let's just slow down for a second and lock this in, because this right here is your ultimate cheat sheet. This is your repeatable framework to take literally any vague AI mandate and turn it into a structured, highly defensible action plan. Step 1, state the vague executive brief out loud. Step 2, draft your level 1 splits strictly by outcome, not by the flashy new tech tool. Step 3, rigorously test those boundaries out loud in under 90 seconds. And Step 4, drill down to a maximum of 12 actionable leaves. If you follow these 4 steps methodically, you will absolutely outmaneuver any team that just starts blindly building pilots and setting their budget on fire. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, Finding Your Narrow Path, Choosing from the 12 Leaves. So you have taken the chaos, you've mapped the entire universe of the problem, and you've distilled it down to a beautiful, organized structure. But here's the thing, you still can't build everything on day one. Every single leaf on your MECE tree is a candidate for your narrow path, leaving us with one vital question: which highly focused, defensible outcome are you actually going to tackle on Monday morning? Without this tree, you're really just comparing apples to oranges and picking whatever software vendor shouts the loudest. But with it, you have a precise menu of exactly what matters. Look closely at those 12 leaves. Which one has the clearest metrics? Which one has an actual dedicated owner? Because that is exactly where you start. So, I'll leave you with this to think about. Look at your own company's AI roadmap today. Are you building a truly defensible strategy, or are you just funding a dozen different chatbots to answer the exact same question?